What
is our
happens when
territory,
a
not
quiet
yours.
Navy
You need to
SEAL
leave
and his
now.
loyal
How dare
combat
you
dog
stand there
cross
silently while we are
paths with the
talking
most
to you?
entitled
Move it!
family in town?
Before I make you.
A lie was told. A hero was arrested, and a war dog was dragged away in chains. But what no one knew was this: Ethan Wolfe was not a drifter. Shadow was not a threat. And justice was coming, faster and louder than Crescent Bay had ever seen. This is the story of a soldier who refused to break, a dog who never gave up, and the miracle that happens when truth finally rises above power. If you believe in loyalty, courage, and justice, hit subscribe now. A thin gray mist drifted above Crescent Bay as dawn whispered across the quiet shoreline. Ethan Wolfe ran at a steady, controlled pace, each footstep carving small impressions into the cool morning sand. At 34, Ethan possessed the kind of physique forged not in gyms, but in the brutal rhythm of military life. Broad shoulders, corded forearms, and a torso marked by faint scars that were reminders of choices only warriors understood. His skin carried a deep, sun-worn tan. His jawline was sharp, the angles precise as if carved by intention rather than chance. His dark hair, clipped close in a military fade, glistened faintly with moisture from the mist. The gray in his eyes was the color of distant storms, a hue that rarely softened, even on peaceful days. Those eyes had once belonged to a boy who believed the world was simple. Years of covert missions, lost teammates, and near-death moments had stripped away that innocence, leaving the calm, hardened focus of a Navy SEAL who had learned to survive not just for himself, but for the men who fought beside him. Yet beneath that hardened shell, somewhere beneath layers of discipline and the quiet ache of memory, Ethan held pockets of gentleness, ones reserved for only a few souls. Beside him ran one of them. Shadow, a 5-year-old military working dog, moved in perfect synchronization with Ethan's steps. The German Shepherd's coat was a rich midnight black, glossy even in the muted dawn light. His muscular frame flowed with a lethal grace, each stride silent and efficient, the result of years of specialized training with Navy SEAL K-9 units. A thin scar along Shadow's left flank, barely visible now, was a reminder of the explosion he and Ethan had survived during a hostage extraction mission 2 years earlier. That moment had fused them together, not as handler and dog, but as brothers. Shadow's amber eyes scanned everything: the waves, the dunes, the horizon, the distant silhouettes of early risers. Though off-duty, the dog's posture remained disciplined. Ears raised, tail alert, posture squared. Ethan admired that about him. Even in peace, Shadow carried himself like a soldier who never allowed complacency. Ethan inhaled the salty air, feeling the sting of the breeze against his face. He welcomed the discomfort. It grounded him, kept him connected to something real. Crescent Bay had become a temporary refuge, a place recommended by his Navy therapist to recalibrate after an intense deployment cycle. Therapy, that was still a strange word to him. He had spent years compartmentalizing fear, pain, and loss. But losing his team leader, Captain Hargrove, during the last mission had cracked a part of him open. No amount of training could prevent the memory. A burning compound, the sound of Shadow barking in panic, Ethan dragging the captain's lifeless body to cover. Something inside Ethan had shifted in that moment. He did not break, but he bent, and that bend terrified him more than bullets ever had. So here he was, running at dawn, seeking silence instead of firefights. Today, however, silence would not last. Up ahead, further down the beach, colorful shapes moved against the pale backdrop of fog. As Ethan and Shadow approached, The vague outlines sharpened into a group of 4 young adults, 3 men and 1 woman, laughing loudly as they filmed themselves with a ring light stuck into the sand. They looked wildly out of place in the quiet serenity of morning, their presence puncturing the stillness like a gaudy billboard in a cathedral. The girl was the first to notice Ethan approaching. She appeared to be around 20, with platinum blonde hair styled in deliberate messy waves, though no amount of styling could hide the expensive salon work. Her skin was pale, smooth, untouched by the harsh realities of life, much less war. She wore a bright pastel athletic set that had clearly been chosen not for exercise, but for the camera. Her name, Ethan would later learn, was Madison Clark. She was the kind of person who curated her life for views, not meaning. The tallest of the young men held the phone, framing scenes with theatrical enthusiasm. He had a narrow face, sharp chin, and hair dyed a bold electric blue. A chain hung loosely around his neck, more decorative than personal. His voice, shrill and performative, carried over the waves. Next to him stood the second male, short and stocky, with a round face and a smug grin. And then there was the last one, the one who mattered, Brandon Hale. Brandon stood in the center, positioned as if the world revolved around him. 22 years old, tall and lean with the kind of beauty money cultivates. Sun-kissed skin from yacht vacations, perfect teeth, and sandy blonde hair styled in a cinematic swoop that no real wind dared disturb. His clothes screamed privilege, designer joggers, a tight white shirt meant to display gym-trained muscles, and a gold bracelet glinting at his wrist. Brandon's posture radiated entitlement, chin lifted, chest out, hands moving in exaggerated gestures as he spoke. There was a self-satisfied tilt at the corner of his mouth, the expression of someone who believed the world was his and merely waiting to applaud. As Ethan passed within 20 feet of them, Shadow trotted slightly ahead, nose twitching at unfamiliar scents. The dog was calm, disciplined, no bark, no growl, no sudden movement. Yet Madison's scream tore through the morning air like shattering glass. "Oh my God, Brandon, it's huge! Is that thing dangerous?" Her performance was so dramatic that even the blue-haired boy paused mid-recording, uncertain whether to laugh or keep filming. But Brandon seized the moment. Ethan watched the transformation, the subtle straightening of the spine, the overconfidence swelling in Brandon's chest like a balloon inflated with ego. Brandon thrust himself forward, stepping between Madison and Shadow, as if facing down a lion rather than a placid, working dog. "Hey, get your animal away from us!" The words came out sharp, loud, dripping with the kind of false bravado that often preceded disaster. Shadow stopped immediately, sitting in perfect obedience. Ethan slowed his stride, assessed the scene with clinical precision, and offered a measured reply. "He's not a threat. He's trained. You're safe." Madison clutched Brandon's arm dramatically. "It looked at me like it wanted to bite me." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen civilians in real danger. He had rescued bloodied children from collapsed buildings, carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire. The contrast between genuine terror and this artificial display scraped against his nerves. Brandon puffed up his chest further, sneering at Ethan. "Control your beast before I have someone do it for you." Ethan's face remained calm, but somewhere deep inside, something flickered. The faint spark of the soldier who had survived too much to be intimidated by boys dressed as men. "Shadow is under control," Ethan repeated evenly, his tone steady as steel. "Just keep calm." But calm was not what Brandon wanted. Not when there was an audience. Not when the camera was rolling again. With a sudden aggressive kick, Brandon sent a spray of wet sand directly into Shadow's face. Shadow jerked back, shaking his head, letting out a confused grunt. Ethan's heart stuttered, first in fear, then in anger. Shadow had survived bombs, bullets, and brutal missions, but he had never experienced cruelty without purpose. And this was not survival. This was humiliation inflicted for entertainment. Ethan stepped between Brandon and Shadow in 3 controlled strides. His posture shifted unconsciously, shoulders squaring, muscles tightening, weight grounded evenly. His voice, when it left his throat, was low and devastatingly calm. "You will not do that again." Brandon hesitated for the briefest moment. For that split second, the mask slipped and uncertainty trembled in his eyes. He saw something in Ethan, a warning shaped by experience, forged by combat. But ego was a powerful anesthetic. Brandon recovered his bravado and scoffed. "You think you can tell me what to do on my beach?" Ethan's gaze hardened. "Public land," the blue-haired boy snickered. "Brandon, dude, don't let this old guy talk back to you." Old guy, Ethan almost laughed. At 34, he was in the prime of his physical and mental capabilities, but in the eyes of these sheltered children, anyone not glued to a phone was ancient. Madison, still eager to play victim, clung tighter to Brandon. "He's scaring me," Brandon smirked, emboldened. "Relax, babe, I'll handle it." He stepped closer, daring Ethan to react, the scent of expensive cologne failing to mask the stench of insecurity. "Maybe I should call my dad. He knows everyone in this town, especially the cops." Ethan met his gaze, unblinking. "Do what you need to, do." Brandon faltered again. He had expected fear, anger, negotiation, anything but utter composure. Ethan's stillness was unsettling, like the quiet before a controlled detonation. Shadow moved to Ethan's side, leaning slightly against his leg, seeking reassurance. Ethan gently touched the dog's neck, grounding them both. His internal monologue sharpened into clarity. "This is not the battlefield. These are not armed insurgents. These are children who believe consequences are optional." But danger came in many forms: entitlement, cruelty, ignorance. Ethan knew the pattern. Men who abused small amounts of power rarely stopped at sand and insults. And something in Brandon, something brittle and hungry, told Ethan that this moment was only the beginning. The morning mist thickened around them. The waves pounded a slow, rhythmic warning. Shadow stared at Brandon with calm obedience, unaware that he had been cast as the villain in someone else's story. Ethan's pulse remained steady, but a cold certainty formed in his mind. The real danger wasn't on distant battlefields. It was standing right here, wearing designer clothing and a smirk. And danger, in any form, always demanded a response. Ethan straightened his spine, eyes ice cold. So be it. The moment Brandon Hale pulled his phone from his pocket, smirking with the arrogance of someone who had never faced a real consequence, Ethan Wolfe sensed the shift in the air. The peaceful quiet of Crescent Bay, the mist, the waves, the early morning stillness, had already fractured when the young man hurled sand into Shadow's face. But now, as Brandon made the call, the fracture widened into something darker. Ethan stood still, Shadow pressed against his leg, the dog's amber eyes wary and confused. Shadow had endured battlefields without fear, but cruelty without cause unsettled him in ways bullets never had. Ethan placed his hand gently on the dog's neck, his touch a silent promise. "I'm here." Minutes later, The distant rumble of an approaching vehicle rolled over the dunes, not the cautious pace of an officer responding to a call. No, this was a declaration, a challenge. The police SUV tore across the beach, ignoring posted signs, ripping through protected dune grass, throwing sand high behind its wheels. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He had seen this energy before. Men who hid their insecurities behind uniforms, guns, and volume. When the SUV stopped in a spray of sand and brine, the man who stepped out fit the profile exactly. Sheriff Walter Briggs was past 50, thick-bodied, broad-chested, with a belly that sagged over his duty belt. His face was flushed a permanent reddish tone, as if anger or whiskey lived beneath his skin at all times. His hair was thin, grayish, slicked back in a way that tried to look authoritative, but instead revealed desperation. A jagged white scar ran across his chin, old, not recent, which added a harshness to his features. His mustache was thick but sloppily maintained, and his eyes, small and dark, carried none of the measured control a real lawman possessed. Briggs projected dominance, but only the kind built on fear, never respect. Behind that tough facade was a man who relied on people like the Hale family for validation. His boots, heavy and black, thudded on the sand as he approached. "Move away from the kids," Briggs barked. His voice was gravelly and loud, trained more for bar fights than public service. "Hands where I can see them." Ethan remained motionless, his posture relaxed but unmistakably disciplined. "Officer," Ethan replied, his voice low, calm, precise. "No threat was made. My dog remained in a seated command. This is a misunderstanding." Brandon strutted forward, puffed up arrogance returning now that his reinforcements had arrived. "He threatened us, Sheriff. The dog lunged at Madison, nearly took her arm off." Madison, who stood safely behind Brandon, widened her eyes in sudden, dramatic terror. "It was terrifying," she added, clutching Brandon's arm, though she hadn't been within 10 feet of Shadow. Sheriff Briggs didn't bother to assess anything. He didn't look at footprints, the dog's position, or Ethan's behavior. He looked only at Brandon, at his expensive watch, his designer clothes, his gleaming confidence, and made his decision. "Put your hands behind your back," Briggs ordered. "This is assault and reckless endangerment." Shadow let out a soft whine. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "My dog did nothing." "I said hands behind your back," Briggs roared, stepping into Ethan's space. Ethan stared into Briggs's eyes and saw it clearly. Insecurity, resentment, and the thrill of exerting power over someone he assumed had none. Ethan lowered his hands slowly, deliberately. He would not escalate, not with Shadow at risk. Briggs grabbed Ethan's wrist roughly and snapped the cuffs around them. The metal bit hard into Ethan's skin, but he didn't react. What hurt wasn't the restraint. It was what happened next. "Get the dog," Briggs ordered to the second officer exiting the SUV. The second officer was tall, lean, early 40s, with thinning brown hair and a nervous twitch in his left eye. This was Deputy Carl Rourke, a man who never questioned orders, especially when those orders came from someone stronger, louder, or with more political backing. Rourke pulled a catch pole from the back of the truck. The moment Shadow saw the device, he stepped backward, ears folding, uncertainty trembling through his body. Ethan's voice cracked, not in fear, but in urgency. "Shadow has combat trauma. Don't use that. If you approach calmly, he will follow my command." But Briggs was already waving dismissively. "That mutt goes in the cage. I'm not getting bit today." Shadow barked for the first time, not aggressively, fearfully. He looked up at Ethan, confused, as Rourke looped the metal collar around his neck. Ethan stepped forward instinctively. Briggs shoved him back with unnecessary force. "Don't make this worse," Briggs growled. Ethan bit down hard on his frustration. He had faced ambushes without trembling. He had patched his own wounds in the desert while enemy fire cracked overhead. But this, watching Shadow's breath rasp sharply as the pole tightened, this was agony. Shadow yelped, the sound slicing through Ethan's chest like shrapnel. "Easy, boy," Ethan said, voice choking despite his control. I'm right here. Rourke dragged Shadow toward the SUV. Sand scraped beneath the dog's claws as he fought not out of aggression, but confusion. Ethan felt something inside him fracture again, another echo of moments he had failed to protect someone he loved. Briggs pushed Ethan toward his cruiser. "You're done here." "Sheriff," a new voice called from behind them. Ethan turned. A young police officer approached, female, around 26, slim build, about 5'6", with soft brown hair tied in a neat ponytail. Her face was oval-shaped, gentle, with pale skin and freckles scattered lightly across her cheeks. Her eyes were a deep, earnest green, carrying both innocence and a sharp intuition beneath the surface. Her uniform was crisp and spotless, her posture straight, almost nervous, but there was something in her expression, a quiet defiance struggling against fear. This was Officer Lily Grant, the newest recruit in the Crescent Bay Police Department. She had joined the force with a reputation for integrity, influenced deeply by memories of her older brother, a Marine who died in Afghanistan. His sense of duty shaped her beliefs about justice. And because of that, she saw something wrong unfolding before her. "Sheriff Briggs," Lily repeated, stepping closer. "He's cooperating, and the dog—" Briggs shot her a venomous look. "You questioning my authority, Grant?" Lily's throat tightened, but she held her ground. "Sir, I'm just saying, his posture, his tone, he's clearly trained military. That man is not a threat." Brandon scoffed loudly. "You serious? He nearly killed my girlfriend." Madison blinked as if reminded of her role. "Yes, he was terrifying." Lily glanced at them briefly, then back to Ethan. Her instincts told her the truth. The discipline in his stance, the calm breath control, the way he placed his body between the officers and the dog. This was not a violent man. This was someone used to being in command of danger, not causing it. "Sheriff, please," Lily said quietly. "At least listen to his statement." Briggs jabbed a thick finger toward her face. "Not another word. Fall back." Lily's jaw clenched, but she stepped aside, helpless. Briggs shoved Ethan into the back of the cruiser. The door slammed with a metallic finality. Through the window, Ethan saw Shadow shoved into a metal kennel in the animal control van. The dog's chest heaved rapidly, his eyes wide with fear. Ethan whispered through the glass, unheard, "I promise I'll get you back." The convoy of humiliation began. At the station, Sheriff Briggs marched ahead like a triumphant hunter returning with prey. Ethan was escorted through narrow hallways that smelled of old coffee and worn carpet. Officers glanced up briefly, then looked away, habitually accepting whatever their superiors deemed truth. Inside the booking area, Briggs removed the cuffs without gentleness. Ethan rotated his shoulders slightly, muscles aching, but expression unreadable. He stood tall, feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped lightly at his lower back, a posture a trained soldier fell into naturally. His eyes remained calm, though grief simmered beneath the surface. Lily Grant sat at the computer desk, lips pressed tightly together as Ethan approached. She spoke gently. "Sir, I'm Officer Grant. I'll be doing your intake information." Her voice carried empathy she was trying desperately to hide under professionalism. Ethan nodded once. "Ethan Wolf." Lily typed the name, her eyes scanning the man before her. She saw the controlled breathing, the steady gaze, the absence of panic. She had studied trauma responses in training. This was not one of them. This was the composure of someone who had survived things beyond her imagination. "Shadow has combat memory," Ethan said suddenly, voice low but firm. "If you mishandle him, he'll panic. He's not a danger unless he's harmed or isolated." Briggs, hovering nearby, let out an exaggerated sigh. "Grant, ignore that. The dog's going where dangerous animals go." Ethan lowered his gaze momentarily, only a fraction, but the pain radiated through him like a tremor. Losing teammates on missions had carved deep wounds in his psyche. The idea of losing Shadow, his last living connection to countless battles, was unbearable. Briggs stepped closer, leaning into Ethan's space, breath smelling faintly of stale coffee. "Your mutt's just evidence now," he said, with a smug, vicious grin. Something primal flickered in Ethan's eyes, a quiet flash of danger, but he reined it in instantly. He had to, for Shadow. Lily saw the flicker and felt her heart squeeze. This man wasn't dangerous. He was breaking. Briggs barked orders to process Ethan, then walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing triumph. Lily swallowed hard, turning to Ethan softly. I'm sorry this is happening." Ethan's voice was calm. Too calm. "Justice bends easily when held by the wrong hands." Lily froze, absorbing the weight of the sentence. Not poetic, not rehearsed, but lived. She wanted to help. She didn't yet know how. But something inside her whispered that this man's arrest was not just wrong. It was the beginning of something much larger. And justice, now distorted, was about to face a reckoning. Ethan Wolf sat in the holding cell, his wrists sore where the metal cuffs had dug deep into his skin, though the physical discomfort meant nothing compared to the tight ache in his chest. The ache had a name: Shadow. The German shepherd had been dragged away from him, gasping against a catchpole, eyes wide with bewilderment. Ethan had endured pain, loss, and death across continents, but the helplessness he felt now gnawed through him like acid. These walls were not the cold of enemy prisons, nor the concrete cells of foreign interrogators. They were worse, because here injustice wore a badge. The cell itself was dimly lit, pale fluorescent lights flickering overhead like a heartbeat on the edge of failure. The paint on the cinderblock walls was chipped, exposing gray beneath the beige. A small bench made of steel jutted from the wall. The floor smelled faintly of disinfectant and old sweat. 2 other detainees occupied nearby cells. A thin man with hollow cheeks and jittery movements, obviously battling addiction, muttered to himself. The other, a weary dock worker with thick forearms and bloodshot eyes, stared blankly at the floor, lost in exhaustion. Ethan did not fear them, nor did he pity them. He simply observed. A soldier was always observing. Minutes stretched long, slow, dragging through time like debris caught in an undertow. Then a voice echoed faintly through the corridor. "Inmate Wolf," someone called. The keys rattled. Officer Lily Grant appeared, her young features tense as she approached the cell. She carried a portable phone, the kind allowed for detainee calls. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes carried something new, a flicker of determination. "You're allowed 1 phone call now," she said, her voice soft but controlled. Ethan stood, tall and broad in the cramped space. His movements were smooth, deliberate, even as tension coiled beneath his calm exterior. "Thank you," he replied. Lily glanced around before leaning slightly closer, lowering her voice. "If you have someone who can help you, I recommend calling them. Sheriff Briggs is unpredictable when he works with the Hales." Her eyes briefly darted down the hallway, cautious of being overheard. Ethan studied her face for a second. The sincerity, the quiet restraint, the morality she was trying so hard to protect under pressure. A young officer, inexperienced but not blind. She saw the wrongness of the situation, and she was trying, even if only through small acts, to set something right. Ethan nodded once. "I appreciate your honesty." Lily looked down, cheeks warming slightly, but she stepped aside to let him exit the cell. As he walked down the corridor, his presence filled the narrow space. Broad shoulders, disciplined stride, calm authority radiating from him, despite being labeled a prisoner. Some officers looked up as he passed. They did not see a criminal. They saw a man who carried himself with a stillness that came from facing death and surviving. Officer Dale Kincaid, a middle-aged officer with a thick beard and deep-set hazel eyes, watched him silently. Kincaid had once been in the Marines. His tattoo of the eagle, globe, and anchor peeked subtly from beneath his sleeve. He made no move to intervene, but he made no move to mock either. He simply nodded at Ethan with the faintest flicker of recognition. Ethan returned the nod. Brotherhood, even unspoken, was never ignored. The phone room was small, scarcely more than a closet with a metal stool and a single corded receiver. Lily closed the door behind him. Alone, Ethan inhaled deeply, closing his eyes for a brief second. Think, breathe, act. When he opened them, the soldier returned. He picked up the receiver, dialed a number he knew by heart, one that no civilian database would ever record. It connected on the first ring. "O'Donnell," a gruff voice answered, thick with fatigue and irritation, the kind worn by men who seldom slept and never stopped carrying burdens. "Sir," Ethan said quietly, "this is Wolf." There was a sharp inhale, shock, alarm, then something like protective fury. "Ethan, where the hell are you? I've been trying to reach you for a week." Ethan swallowed, jaw tightening. "Detained, sir. Crescent Bay Police Department." A dangerous pause followed. "Detained," Colonel Marcus O'Donnell repeated, his voice lowering into a simmer. "For what?" Ethan exhaled through his nose. "False charges, and Shadow was taken by animal control after being handled aggressively." Silence. Except it wasn't silence. Ethan could feel the storm forming in the colonel's breath. Colonel Marcus O'Donnell was a man carved from war. 52 years old, tall with a towering presence built from decades of command. His hair, once jet black, now carried thick streaks of iron gray. His face bore sharp angles, creases etched deep across his brow, a map of every hard decision he had ever made. He wore a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard, adding gravitas to his stern expression. Marcus had a presence that even generals respected, but the most striking thing about him was his eyes, steel blue, intense, unyielding, eyes that had stared into fire and refused to blink. Ethan had met him 8 years ago when he joined the elite task force Talon. Marcus was more than a commander. He was the closest thing Ethan had to family after losing his parents in a car accident at 19. Marcus had trained Ethan, molded him, seen him break, and remade him stronger. When Marcus said Ethan was like a younger brother, he meant it. Now that protective instinct roared awake. "Ethan," Marcus said, voice low and lethal. Tell me exactly what happened. Ethan walked him through it. All of it. The beach, the spoiled kids, Brandon Hale, Sheriff Briggs, the catch pole, Shadow's terrified eyes. The quiet remains of pain deepened in Ethan's voice despite his discipline. Marcus listened without interruption. They touched Shadow, the colonel growled under his breath. Sir, Ethan replied, I will remain compliant, but Shadow is not safe. Another beat of silence. Then Marcus spoke with the cold command of a man mobilizing an empire. Hold steady, do not provoke, do not resist, and do not say one more word to anyone in that building. I will handle this. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Relief, not weakness, but purpose, flowed through him. Marcus O'Donnell was not a man who made threats. He was a man who ended wars. Understood, sir, Ethan said. Good, Marcus replied. Ethan Wolfe does not get abandoned, and Shadow sure as hell doesn't either. The line cut. Ethan set the receiver down gently. There was no need to rush. The storm had already begun. He stepped outside the room. Lily waited in the hall, hands folded. She studied his face. You okay? Ethan nodded softly. Help is coming. Something in his tone made her shiver. This wasn't boastful confidence. This was certainty forged from the loyalty of warriors. Minutes later, the first tremor came, not through sound, but vibration. The fluorescent lights quivered. Dust drifted from the ceiling tiles. Officers paused mid-step. What the? Someone muttered. The second tremor rolled in stronger. Then the sound followed. A deep, thunderous chopping of air. Shadow-like shapes crossed the windows. A helicopter, but not civilian, not Coast Guard. This was military-grade power. A UH-60 Black Hawk thundered overhead, its rotors slicing through the sky with authority that could not be ignored. The entire station seemed to bow under its presence. Outside, the red and white Navy police convoy screeched to a halt in front of the station, 3 armored SUVs and a tactical transport vehicle. Officers rushed to the windows. Sheriff Briggs burst from his office, face pale. What is happening? Who authorized this? No one answered, because the answer arrived in the doorway. Colonel Marcus O'Donnell walked into the station like a gathering storm. He wore his duty uniform, navy blue with silver insignia gleaming. His posture was a column of command, tall and broad, shoulders squared with authority earned from decades of combat. Colonel Marcus stood 6'3", built like a seasoned warrior, wide chest, thick arms, presence filling the room. His beard framed a jaw built from granite, a scar cut through his right eyebrow, a remnant of a hostage rescue gone wrong 12 years earlier. Behind him, 4 Navy military police officers followed, armored, armed, disciplined, eyes scanning the room. Marcus's eyes locked onto Ethan instantly. Ethan stood behind the booking desk, hands free now, but posture rigid. Their eyes met, soldier to commander, brother to brother. Marcus strode across the room, boots striking the tile floor with rhythmic intent. Officers stepped away instinctively. Even Lily straightened, sensing she was in the presence of a legend. Sheriff Briggs attempted to intercept him. Colonel, sir, this is a misunderstanding. Marcus didn't even slow. Move. Briggs froze, swallowing hard. Marcus reached Ethan, scanned his face, his posture, then placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. You okay? I'm fine, Ethan said, though his voice thinned slightly. Shadow isn't. Marcus's jaw flexed. The air between them sharpened. No one touches my men, Marcus said, voice deep as thunder. And no one harms a warrior like Shadow. The station fell silent. Justice had walked through the door. The convoy sliced through Crescent Bay like a blade of purpose, the engines humming in tight formation as Colonel Marcus O'Donnell led the way. Blue and white Navy police SUVs rolled behind his command vehicle, their lights flashing in synchronized pulses that reflected off shop windows and awoke residents still curled beneath blankets. Ethan Wolfe sat beside Marcus, his posture rigid but his breathing controlled. His hands, though free now, remained curled in tight, unconscious fists. Shadows from passing buildings streaked across his face, sharpening the already severe planes of his cheekbones and jaw. He looked like a statue carved from quiet suffering and unbreakable resolve. Marcus studied him for a long moment, the flickering dashboard lights revealing the tightening muscles around Ethan's eyes. "You're holding your breath," Marcus muttered. Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the air release from lungs thick with dread. "I know," he admitted. "It's the waiting, sir." Marcus nodded. He understood. The colonel had known countless soldiers, brave, skilled, deadly, but only a few possessed the soul-deep bond Ethan shared with Shadow. Shadow wasn't just a companion. He was Ethan's anchor, a creature who had stood beside him when smoke clouded the world and the line between life and death narrowed to a breath. When Ethan nearly bled out in Kandahar, Shadow stayed pressed against him, keeping him conscious with low growls until medics arrived. When a bomb collapsed a warehouse in Syria, Shadow had dug through debris with bleeding paws until he found Ethan. Their bond wasn't born of training. It was born of survival. The thought of Shadow's fear, of being alone again, dug claws into Ethan's chest. Marcus tapped the steering wheel. "We'll get him," the colonel said, voice firm but gentle in its rare softness. "Shadow's a soldier. He'll hold on." The words were meant to soothe, but the ache in Ethan's throat only deepened. The convoy turned onto the industrial road leading toward the Crescent Bay Animal Control Center, a squat, weather-worn building sitting between a salvage yard and an old concrete mixing plant. The facility looked more like a forgotten storage unit than a place meant to protect living creatures. Fencing made of chain link and rust surrounded the property, barbed wire slicing sharp silhouettes against the morning sky. Ethan felt something cold settle inside him. "They took him here," he whispered, barely audible. Marcus parked the SUV with a controlled jerk. "Then here's where we take him back." The moment Marcus opened his door, the Navy police stepped out in perfect coordination, forming a protective formation around the entrance. Their boots hit the pavement like synchronized thunder. Inside the facility, a woman jolted up from behind the reception desk. She was in her late 40s, heavy-set, with tired brown eyes and coarse black hair pulled back into a frizzy bun. Her name, tag-read Martha Briggs, and Ethan instantly noticed the shared last name with Sheriff Walter Briggs. Martha's expression flickered between fear and irritation. Clearly, she had not been expecting military intervention this morning. "Can I help?" she began. Marcus didn't slow, his voice slicing cleanly through the stale air. "Where is the German Shepherd brought here approximately 45 minutes ago? Black coat, 5 years old." Martha blinked rapidly. He's in Isolation Wing B. He was aggressive. We couldn't get near him. The officer who brought him said he was dangerous." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low, but trembling with suppressed rage. "He's not dangerous. He's terrified." Martha swallowed, her eyes flicking to Ethan's rigid form. Something about his expression, ice-cold control layered over deep anguish, made her look away. "We followed protocol," she muttered defensively. Marcus leaned in slightly, his height and authority overwhelming the cramped reception area. "Take us to him." Martha nodded quickly, motioning toward the back hall. As they passed through the corridor, Ethan's heart pounded harder. Each door they passed held the faint scent of animals, fear, antiseptic, loneliness. Officer Dale Kincaid walked silently behind them, maintaining a protective perimeter. Though not Navy police, he had insisted on joining when the colonel confronted Briggs and learned Shadow's location. A quiet man shaped by his own years of service, Kincaid carried a weight in his brown eyes, a recognition of Ethan's pain. He said nothing, but Ethan felt the solidarity like a silent hand on his back. The deeper they went, the louder the sounds became. Barking, whimpering, the metallic rattle of claws scraping wire. But beneath the chaotic noise, Ethan's trained ears caught a single desperate sound, a high, frantic yelp that did not match any ordinary distress. It was Shadow, caught in a spiral of panic, believing he had been abandoned again. Ethan broke into a run. Marcus didn't stop him. The colonel followed, long strides echoing down the hall. They reached the final door, Isolation Wing B, where a laminated warning sign hung crookedly. Martha fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped them. "He's in the last kennel," she stammered. "We didn't sedate him yet. We couldn't get close enough." Ethan didn't wait. The moment the door clicked open, he pushed past her, the others on his heels. The isolation wing was cold, sterile, lit with flickering fluorescent lights. Metal kennels lined both sides of the narrow aisle. The smell of bleach clung to the air, but beneath it was a thick, raw scent of fear. And there, at the far end, was Shadow. The dog slammed against the chain-link door, snapping and clawing in blind terror. His black fur stood in bristling spikes. His breath came in short, frantic bursts. His paws were scraped raw from throwing himself repeatedly against the metal, leaving smears of blood near the hinges. His eyes were wild, unseeing, lost in a trauma loop so deep nothing rational could penetrate it. Ethan felt the room tilt. This was beyond fear. This was Shadow drowning in memories of explosions, gunfire, the moments when Ethan nearly didn't return. "Shadow," Ethan whispered, but his voice cracked. Marcus placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Go to him," Marcus murmured. "He needs you." Ethan stepped forward slowly, every fiber of his being shifting into the mode that had saved lives on battlefields. Calm, steady, intentional. "Shadow," he said again, stronger now. The dog didn't respond. He clawed harder, desperate. Ethan knelt 3 feet from the kennel, lowering himself to the cold concrete floor. He bowed his head, not in defeat, but in surrender. A posture Shadow had been trained to understand. "I am not a threat. I am yours." "Shadow, hör auf," Ethan murmured in German, voice barely above a breath. "Komm zurück, Junge. Ich bin hier." The specialized commands were ones only they used, born from missions where silence could mean survival. Shadow paused mid-snarl. His ears twitched. His body trembled violently, as if unsure whether to trust the world in front of him. Ethan lifted his eyes slowly, letting Shadow see him, truly see him. "Buddy," Ethan whispered, voice shaking. "It's me." Shadow's breathing hitched. His ears rose. His eyes, once frantic, softened in recognition. Then came the sound Ethan had been dying to hear. A low, broken whine that melted into a desperate, hopeful cry. Shadow pressed his nose against the metal bars, tail thumping shakily against the wall. "That's it," Ethan breathed, scooting forward on his knees. "I'm right here. I didn't leave you." He pressed his forehead gently to the wire, and Shadow did the same, whimpering. Ethan closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek and disappearing into the fur between the metal gaps. "Open the cage," Marcus ordered, voice thick with emotion. Martha hesitated. "Sir, protocol says—" Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Open it." His tone carried the weight of command learned from burying soldiers, leading men into fire, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Martha scrambled to unlock the door. As soon as it swung open, Shadow launched himself forward. 80 pounds of trembling muscle and raw emotion collided with Ethan's chest, knocking him backward. Ethan caught him instinctively, arms wrapping around the dog as Shadow buried his muzzle against Ethan's neck, licking frantically, whining with relief, pressing every part of himself into the man he thought he had lost. Ethan laughed, broken, breathless, overwhelmed, as Shadow's tail thumped wildly. "I'm here, buddy," he choked. "I'm here." Marcus turned away, pretending to cough, swiping a hand quickly beneath his left eye. Kincaid looked down, lips tightening to hide a rare crack in his stoic demeanor. Even Martha's expression softened, guilt tugging at her features. Ethan held Shadow for a long time, letting the tremors fade. The dog finally settled, pressing his body protectively against Ethan's leg. When Ethan stood, Shadow moved in perfect heel position, head up, chest proud, dignity restored. Marcus stepped forward. "Let's take him home," the colonel said quietly. Ethan nodded. As they walked back through the corridor, Shadow glued to his side, the officers stood silently, stepping back to let them pass. Soldiers recognized soldiers, even when one of them had 4 legs. The evening sun hovered low over Crescent Bay, turning the ocean into a vast mirror of molten gold. A warm breeze rolled across the waterfront, carrying the scent of kelp and distant pine. For the first time in many days, the town felt still, as if it were collectively holding its breath, waiting for justice to settle in like the tide reclaiming its rightful shore. Outside the Crescent Bay courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Townspeople, veterans, families walking their dogs, and even a few reporters from neighboring cities who had been drawn by the strange story of a Navy SEAL, a combat dog, and the collapse of a local power structure. Ethan Wolfe stood beside Colonel Marcus O'Donnell on the courthouse steps, Shadow pressed tightly against his left leg. Ethan's stance was upright and formal, but his face held a depth of exhaustion that no military training could fully conceal. His muscles were tense beneath his jacket, the hard lines of his physique visible even without the uniform. His steel-gray eyes took in everything: the murmuring crowd, the gulls circling overhead, the police officers standing rigidly at the entrance. Only Shadow's presence kept him grounded. The dog's black coat glistened under the falling light, his posture alert yet calm. Shadow was no longer the trembling animal from the isolation cage. He carried himself like a warrior anew, chest lifted, ears forward, eyes sharp and unwavering. Every inch the 5-year-old seasoned special operations canine he was trained to be. Inside the courthouse, justice was being administered with a swiftness rarely seen in small towns. Sheriff Walter Briggs, thick-necked, heavy-set, and sweating beneath the too-tight collar of his faded brown uniform, sat slumped at the defendant's table. His skin had taken on a sallow hue. The arrogance that once clung to him like a second skin had evaporated in the face of impending accountability. Sheriff Briggs had been a bully long before Crescent Bay learned his name. A childhood shaped by a father who ruled with fists instead of guidance had turned Walter into a man who confused fear with respect. His rise through the department was less about merit and more about the Hale family's influence. But today, his shield of protection was gone. A federal investigation had been launched the moment Marcus reported the unlawful detention of a Navy SEAL and the mistreatment of a military working dog. Briggs knew the charges: abuse of authority, falsification of statements, and obstructing a federal asset. And he knew the consequences. He could lose everything. At the witness stand, Officer Lily Grant spoke clearly. At 26, she had the sharp, cautious beauty of someone who had grown up having to read danger in a room before stepping into it. Tall and slender, with sandy blonde hair pulled into a restrained braid and pale skin that flushed when she was nervous, she carried herself with a mixture of rookie hesitation and emerging strength. Her blue eyes shimmered with a mixture of fear and resolve as she testified. She had been raised by a single mother, a paramedic, and had inherited both the compassion and the grit of someone accustomed to emergencies. Lily had joined the department wanting to help people, not serve the whims of the wealthy. Her voice trembled at first, but found steadiness as she continued. Ethan Wolf showed no aggression, she said. Shadow sat on command. The dog demonstrated signs of distress only after being struck by Mr. Hale. She exhaled, shoulders lifting slightly before falling again. I believed the arrest was unlawful, but my objections were dismissed by Sheriff Briggs. Briggs glared at her from across the room, but Lily didn't look away. Her spine remained straight, her hands clasped calmly before her. It was the posture of someone choosing honesty over fear, truth over a corrupted chain of command. When the judge dismissed her from the stand, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Even the skeptics began to understand. This was not a story of a violent drifter and a wild dog. This was a story of power, privilege, and the quiet courage of those who refused to bow to either. Next came Brandon Hale. The golden-haired heir to the Hale fortune walked into the courtroom with the posture of a man trying to make himself small without seeming weak. 22 years old, tall but soft, with meticulously styled blonde hair now deflated by stress, he wore an expensive charcoal sweater and designer jeans. But even the finest fabric couldn't hide his trembling hands. Brandon had always been told the world was his. His father's money, reputation, and legacy had built a safety net wide enough to catch any mistake. Until now. The judge addressed him with a voice as hard as granite. Mr. Hale, you were given the opportunity to submit a written apology. You declined. The court now orders you to make your statement publicly. Brandon swallowed hard. His throat bobbed. His eyes flickered toward the crowd, toward Marcus's disapproving stare, Lily's quiet expectation, and Ethan's expressionless calm. Shadow's golden eyes locked onto him, unblinking. Perhaps it was the dog's steady gaze that finally broke him. Brandon stepped forward, voice cracking as he began. I lied, he said. Gasps spread through the gallery. He continued, cheeks flushing a deep, ashamed red. Shadow didn't attack anyone. He didn't even bark aggressively. I kicked sand at him because I wanted to impress my friends. He looked at Ethan now, directly, for the first time without arrogance. I accused you falsely because I didn't want to look weak. I'm sorry, Mr. Wolf. Ethan didn't nod. He didn't soften. He simply held Brandon's gaze until the young man faltered, lowering his head. The judge mandated community service, public apology, and mandatory behavioral counseling for Brandon, an outcome that was lenient compared to what might have happened had Marcus pressed for federal charges. But Ethan was not interested in destroying the boy. He just wanted truth to stand where lies had once been rooted. As the court session ended, the crowd slowly exited into the orange glow of the setting sun. Marcus clapped Ethan gently on the shoulder. "You handled that with restraint most men don't have." Ethan's jaw shifted. "I didn't do it for him. I did it for Shadow." Marcus nodded. "I know." Shadow leaned into Ethan's leg, sensing the emotional shift. Ethan reached down, brushing his fingers through the dog's fur. The gesture was tender, grounding. Lily Grant approached hesitantly. "Mr. Wolf," she said. Ethan turned, offering her a small nod. She tucked a loose hair behind her ear, cheeks warming. "I wanted to say thank you, not for what happened, but for how you carried yourself. Most men would have fought back." Ethan's voice was low, steady. "There was a time I would have, but Shadow was at risk, and he comes first." Lily nodded. "I understand." She hesitated, then added softly, "I'm sorry I didn't do more that day." Ethan studied her sincere posture, the earnest light in her eyes. "You did something today," he said. "That matters." Lily smiled faintly before stepping back as Marcus motioned for Ethan to follow. The colonel had one last meeting with federal investigators, but Ethan was finished, truly finished, with courthouse walls and the stares of strangers. He wanted open sky. He wanted quiet. He wanted home. Ethan stepped into the golden evening with Shadow glued to his side. The crowd parted instinctively. People nodded, whispered, some saluted. Ethan acknowledged none of it. Praise felt irrelevant. He wasn't a hero today. He was just a man who refused to let his partner die alone. Marcus finished his conversation and approached Ethan, removing his sunglasses as the sun dipped lower. His sharp, weathered features softened slightly. "You're free to go, Ethan," he said. "Everything else is in motion. Briggs will face charges. The department will be restructured. Crescent Bay will change after this." Ethan didn't smile, but his shoulders loosened. "Thank you, sir." Marcus eyed him thoughtfully. "You have a place to stay?" Ethan nodded. "The cabin." Marcus chuckled softly. "Figures. You always did prefer the edges of things." He gave a two-finger salute toward Shadow. "Take care of your handler, soldier." Shadow wagged his tail once. Ethan and Shadow walked away from the courthouse, the last beams of sunlight turning them into silhouettes. One man, one dog, moving in perfect step. The gravel road leading to Ethan's oceanside cabin stretched long and quiet, lined with tall dune grass swaying in the breeze. The air cooled as night approached, shifting from gold to rose, then to lavender. When Ethan reached the cabin, a small wooden structure with gray shingles and a porch facing the sea, he felt the tension leave his body inch by inch. The cabin sat on a gentle rise overlooking the water. The windows reflected the fire of sunset. The wooden steps creaked under Ethan's boots. Shadow bounded up them easily, tail wagging, nose already nudging the door with an eagerness that melted Ethan's heart. Inside, the cabin welcomed them with warmth. A hand-built stone fireplace sat unlit, but ready. A wool blanket draped across a weathered couch. A shelf held a few framed photos. Ethan's old team, Shadow in his vest, and a picture of Ethan's younger sister, Lena, smiling with the sun behind her. Lena's death, years ago, was the wound Ethan never spoke of. The wound that shaped the steel in his heart, the quiet depth in his gaze, and the fierce loyalty he held for those he loved. Shadow padded to Ethan's side and rested his head gently on his thigh, sensing the shift in Ethan's breathing. the heaviness of old memories. Ethan stroked behind Shadow's ears. "We made it back," he whispered. Shadow's tail thumped twice. Ethan walked to the porch as the last sliver of sun kissed the ocean. He settled into the wooden chair, Shadow curling at his feet. The sky turned a deep orange, then fiery red, then melting into purple night. Seagulls rode the final breeze before roosting. The world quieted, and for the first time in what felt like years, Ethan's soul quieted with it. "We survived again, old friend," he murmured. Shadow lifted his head, pressed it against Ethan's knee, then lowered it again in complete trust. The wind was gentle, the sea shimmered, and danger, for the moment, was nowhere in sight. Just a man, a dog, and the promise of a softer tomorrow. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, through loyalty, through courage, or through the simple determination to stand up for what is right. Ethan and Shadow's story reminds us that miracles often hide inside ordinary days. They live in the moments when we refuse to give up, when we protect someone who cannot speak for themselves, and when love, whether from a loyal dog or a steadfast friend, pulls us back from the edge. In our own lives, we may not fight battles on distant shores, but we all face storms of doubt, injustice, fear, and loneliness. And just like Ethan, we learn that the miracle is not always in winning the battle, but in having the heart to keep walking forward. May this story inspire you to believe that goodness still exists, that loyalty still matters, and that God still works quietly through the people and the creatures He places in our path. If this message touched your heart, please share this video, leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so more people can receive stories of hope, honor, and redemption. And now, from our hearts to yours, may God bless you and your family. May He guard your home with peace, grant you strength in moments of weakness, and surround you with the quiet miracles that remind you you are never alone. If you believe God watches over the humble and protects the righteous, type Amen in the comments. God bless you all.